Hello, I am Suzanne Hilser-Wiles, President of Grenzebach, Glier and Associates. We appreciate you joining us for today's webinar, How a Top University with a Lean Advancement Team is Managing During the Pandemic. I am joined today by Kathi Dantley Warren, who has served as Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations at Rice University in Houston since July 2019. Prior to her promotion, Kathi served as Associate Vice President for Development at Rice. In this role, she was responsible for the day-to-day operations of fundraising programs and also departments within development and alumni relations, including gift planning, major gifts, school-based fundraising, and annual giving. Before Rice, Kathi served as the Senior Executive Director of Development for the Duke Cancer Institute and as Assistant Dean for Alumni Affairs and Development at Cornell University's College of Engineering. Kathi earned an MA in Cell and Molecular Biology and Microbiology from Duke University and a BA in Biology from Hampton University. Kathi and I have known each other for a number of years, and I've had the opportunity to work with her at both Duke and Rice, so I'm especially excited to have her here with us today. Before we get started, I have a couple of administrative reminders. This will be a 30-minute discussion. We ask that you submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're not going to be able to answer questions during this webinar today, but we will respond to your questions via our website. Finally, you will all be on mute during the webinar. So now to Kathi. Kathi, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, Suzanne.
Can you begin, Kathi, first by explaining a little bit about your program at Rice, giving them a little bit of background for context for our discussion?
Sure. Well, at Rice, we have about 130 staff in the Development and Alumni Relations Division proper. We have a few other colleagues in some other divisions that we consider as operational partners, but the core group is 130 staff. We are raising between 140 and 180 or $90 million in any given year. That's sort of over the past 3 years, and that includes raising about $8 million annually for our unrestricted annual fund. We are currently in the silent phase of a comprehensive campaign. The date for our public launch is still to be determined, and as many institutions are dealing with changes to their operations in light of what's happened with the global pandemic, et cetera, we are in the process of determining when that launch will occur. And I would describe our program as a hybrid. Most of the resources are certainly managed centrally, and all of those folks do report into me and to my team. But we have fundraisers who are placed within individual schools and units, 8 schools and units as well. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, and we have operated like this really for the past several years.
Thank you, Kathi. It'll be interesting as we get in our discussion to hear a little bit more from you about how you managed the team and communicated with the team, since you do have that hybrid structure. So what are Rice's plans currently for opening up campus?
Sure. Well, as every institution in the country, Rice has been endeavoring to determine how can we best deliver our curriculum and our unique, highly residential experience, given all of the challenges that we're facing. Our plan currently is to start, and we start in mid-August, to start the academic year both fully in person and remote, with a very few exceptions, just the few classes that do not translate well to being delivered remotely. But I should say that this March, before we had to go all remote, we only had 3 classes that were being taught remotely, and we went to having 1,900 courses taught remotely. So we have made an incredible transition, and will be continuing delivering those courses in the fall so that students have the best opportunity to participate, whether they're choosing to come in person or choosing to just stay home and go remote. We are expecting an on-time start. We would wrap up around Thanksgiving, which would put us about a week shorter than our usual semester. That way students would go home before finals, and they would take finals, if I understand it correctly, remotely, and then they would be able to have that long winter break, and that would allow us to kind of position ourselves in case there's a second wave, or the way that we're going, just an increase to the current wave in terms of COVID cases. We're taking a layered approach to developing a safe environment for classes this fall. Matter of fact, just before this message, I got a note from our Dean of Undergraduates. We are, of course, our primary goal is safety. And so masks, physical distancing, contact tracing, changes to our dorms, and we have, the residential colleges that students stay in. Most of the students are on campus. Special procedures in case we do need to isolate students in one particular dorm, or send students off campus if needed to a hotel, which Rice would cover the cost for. Smaller classes, expanding our outside spaces, including adding tent structures, and just changes in general to how students are served food and all that sort of thing. All of those things have been deliberated, and plans have been developed and are being communicated literally, right now to students and parents. So we want to make sure that we're preserving this very rich social residential experience, while also giving students the ability to physically distance. And so we're still planning for that, and are optimistic that that can occur. And as for our division, the Development Alumni Relations Division, we are remote, and my expectation is that we will be through the fall. It is quite possible we won't return until early 2021, but we have not made that definitive determination yet. But I've certainly said to my team, there won't be any travel until 2021, and we're moving big events, of course, largely to being virtual, or almost all virtual with a tiny bit of an in-person aspect to them. And that we're gonna, of course, adhere to limitations that campus is putting in place in terms of the size of social gatherings, indoors and outdoors.
Yeah, so given what you described there, Kathi, as this sort of enormous impact on how you all can go about your business, have you altered your fundraising goals and performance metrics for this coming year? And if so, how?
So we are in the process of determining what the coming year will look like. We hired, so as you noted in my introduction, I took over as VP last July. My replacement as the Associate Vice President, she just started with us June 1, a few weeks ago. And so with her coming on board and some shifts in our leadership structure, she and I will be working closely to determine what the metrics should be for this year. But typical to most programs, we measure common things, visits, attempts, qualifications, new members of our Planned Giving Society, et cetera. And, we have already changed the definition of meetings to just be about substantive engagement. And we've been very, very thoughtful and deliberate about how we're starting to evaluate the staff for their performance this year, and really looking at it through March. And as we go to next year, we'll set metrics that are reflective of basically what we've seen the last 3.5 months. What do we think the capacity for activity is and for success is, and translating that into metrics for next year.
It's, I think so much of what you point to in the description about how Rice is a university and your team is pivoting really just points to the need to continue to be thoughtful and adapt, that we don't have the final answer or anywhere near that yet. So thinking along those lines, of course, Rice is known for its very strong science programs. Have there been new opportunities for fundraising that have emerged from this pandemic? And if so, how has your team pivoted to take advantage of those, particularly as you pointed out, you've got this matrix system. How do you bring everybody together to do that?
So that's been a really exciting development that has come out of all of this. So yes, we are known for our science programs, but we're also a broad spectrum institution, and sometimes that is lost on people. One of our biggest divisions is our social science division, for instance.
Mhm.
We actually have a large sports management program. So we have a breadth and depth of capacity and of academic and research related rigor. So when COVID came along, we, like many institutions, launched a COVID-19 research fund. And so the university put up $500,000, and we are charged with raising an additional $500,000. And we invited faculty to submit their ideas for pilot programs that were answering the challenge of this COVID crisis. And so what we found is that we had about more than 50 submissions of these research projects. And some folks may have heard folks in our global public health group develop, for instance, a very inexpensive ventilator, a $300 ventilator. There were other such developments like a testing app that could use cell phones. And so what people don't know is that we had a lot of other developments that were coming out of other disciplines, out of the social sciences, out of the humanities even.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, so out of the 43 faculty who ended up submitting some form of application, half of them were from engineering, but a quarter of them were actually from the social sciences, and a small percentage were from humanities. Actually, there are more people coming out of the natural sciences, the social sciences than the natural sciences. And other disciplines were represented as well. So we've awarded almost all of the first half of those funds to be delivered. And let me give you an example of one of the things. So we have an incredible, one of the best schools of music in the country, the Shepherd School of Music. And so there's a project, for example, that was between the Shepherd School and our Brown School of Engineering, where they were looking at what is the proper distancing for vocal performers or wind instrument performers in a performance setting in light of COVID, and looking at that so that they can make recommendations, especially to the local arts agencies, as to how they could return to performing. So that's just one example of how our strength in arts, humanities disciplines, as well as in the science and engineering disciplines, allowed us to respond in a unique fashion to the challenge of COVID.
Well, you're going to emerge with this crisis with some really phenomenal stories to tell about philanthropy and the work at Rice. That's terrific.
Yes, absolutely.
So Rice also has a very significant population of international alumni and donors. How are you engaging them during this time? And have you adapted any of your plans for fundraising outside of the US in response to what's happening now?
Yes, and it's for us, it was a disappointment, of course, some of the unrest that was occurring in some of the Asian countries, and then the pandemic. In addition, we were looking to expand our operation and add a couple of positions in international advancement, which is how we've also worked together a little bit to talk about that. So we've had to postpone that in light of everything that's happened and some budget considerations that we, like many other institutions, have made. But of course, like everybody else, also our virtual engagement has been over the top, and we've especially in May and June, have developed and delivered a myriad of different types of programs. We have seen that participation has come from 25 different countries in terms of, when we looked at our numbers, and we're really just starting to dissect these numbers in greater detail. And anybody who's worked with Zoom knows that it can be a little bit more challenging, but we're figuring it out. We know that about 4% of the participants are international. We're thinking about, well, how do we need to enhance our strategy in light of the constraints that have been placed upon us? But we are also seeing outreach from folks, particularly partners in China. I've seen a couple of new groups that have been rekindled even the past few months in light of everything that's happening. So I think you're also seeing the sort of reciprocal, the folks who want to make sure they don't become disengaged. And so they're asking for our help, and we're supporting them in rekindling their chapters, rekindling their activity, and making sure that they are taking advantage of the new programs that we're able now to and have to deliver virtually. So I think this is every challenge is an opportunity if you sort of turn it on its ear. And I think this will be an opportunity for us to engage those populations in a more substantive way.
I probably should have mentioned to our visitors earlier, apropos of your comment about Zoom challenges, thus the reason you can see Kathi and you cannot see me. I was having some connection issues earlier. So what's really interesting about what you were just talking about, Kathi, is that you talked about rekindling some of those groups. So it sounds like you've actually been able to do things that you hadn't even planned for. So there have been opportunities that have emerged that maybe weren't part of your plans that you've been able to incorporate now because of response from people who want to hear what's happening at Rice.
Yeah, so I think we've become even more nimble in terms of responding to interest and taking advantage of alumni and other members of our community's expertise and knowledge. And so we're seeing programs that are just delivered that are, varied in terms of what they are and the expertise that is being, that people are being exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we're developing plans for next year and thinking about how engagement needs to shift. And I think like many institutions, we've been very good about, delivering this Zoom sort of two-dimensional way of engaging with people, but we want to become more robust. We want to engage better in dialogue. We want to try to create virtual communities so that folks are able to not just synchronously, but asynchronously engage with one another so that we can maintain and kind of, stoke the fires of this connection that are happening. We're drawing in people who otherwise hadn't been engaging with us as much, and we're seeing some new names amongst those are coming in. So, how is that giving us an opportunity to engage with them in different ways? We're looking at doing, another round of surveying of our group to understand now how folks want to be engaged with us, what they feel like they need from us. We're also getting a little bit deeper into delivery of programs related to career services. And so partnering our Center for Career Development is outside of our division. So, working even more closely with them. So there are so many things, and truly our group this would be our normal time to reflect and to plan. So we're in that annual planning process now, and we're looking at how things are going to be different for next year along the lines of what I mentioned, but also things like homecoming and reunion, which may attract 1,500 or so people in person, usually in the fall. Well, that won't happen this year. So how will that be different, and how will we deliver that programming, which is both social and content rich, to people in a meaningful way? So a lot of questions. Maybe we'll have this conversation again in a few months and I can give you more answers, but yeah, it's definitely shifted how we think about things and giving us permission to be bold and be innovative.
I think, one of the things that we've consistently heard from clients, which is really interesting as they turn to virtual engagement, the not only number, but the people who they haven't heard from in forever, who are starting to participate, who clearly have wanted to engage with the institution, but just really haven't had a chance. And I think that's one of the heartening things. I was on a call with a client just yesterday where they talked about a family that's been very generous to the institution, and one of the family members who they thought of as uninterested, but has just never physically been able to have the on-campus meeting they have every year, participated. And after this meeting, gave a personal gift. So I think it's also, as you said, kind of making us stop and reflect on, what do we really know, or what did we think we knew about these people and how they want to engage with the institution? So I think the more thoughtful and, I love the idea that you just put forth about surveying people. Like, we don't need to guess, we can actually ask.
Exactly.
So were there other things as you were thinking about this year, and we all always have a list of, if I could, I would. Are there other things that your team either wanted to try or change that the pandemic or working from home has allowed you to experiment with?
Well, we had implemented a remote working policy for the first time that we were sort of testing out. And so we only had a very
before
few
this?
Before this, and it was
Interesting.
very modified. We wanted to make sure we were uniform, and when people were asking, and it was very limited, that we had a uniform answer and way of evaluating those. So we had very, very few people who were mostly remote. I think we have a couple people who are all remote, and those are older situations. They're working fine. So we have since also learned, you know, what other things we can do remotely effectively and where we feel we're challenged. And so we've also been focused on efficiency and effectiveness and safety versus we want to bring everybody back. Because, you know, I felt that was asking the wrong question. Certainly, I would love to be on campus and see the team and see the students, but the most important thing right now is that we deliver and are able to fulfill our mission and stay healthy. And so we're learning about how we can and where we're challenged to work remotely in these times, and that is helping us, I think, be better leaders within the DAR division. The other thing that we're doing is I had been talking with our talent management group about how we can sort of deepen the services and the resources so that it's not just an engine for recruiting, which it had been, and we've been staffing up for the campaign, so that was clearly their number one charge. But I have been doubling down on enhancing our organizational culture and making sure that more broadly efforts around professional development, efforts around retention, our general climate within the organization, that those were being strengthened. And so when a hiring freeze was implemented at the end of March across the campus, I said to my leadership and to the talent management team, this is an opportunity for us to reflect, you know, to turn inward and say, what are the things that we now get to turn our attention to that will strengthen the team as it is. There's a little bit of recruiting still going on. There's some positions that were in the process of being recruited and a few things that we were able to get an exception for. So there's still some onboarding and things that we're doing, but really it's become about enhancing organizational culture. And then in light of everything that happened with the racial tension and the response to the murder of George Floyd as well, we've launched a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force within our division. And so looking at outcomes that it can help us achieve, things that it can help us address related to implicit bias training, to cultural competencies, to just generally supporting the staff and ensuring that our engagement with our constituency is really grounded in the values that, you know, Rice espouses now, and supportive of the entire staff in light of all these issues. So we're now able to turn our attention to launching efforts like that in a very meaningful way. And that's in addition to other task forces and committees around how people want to be recognized, around general sort of staff engagement and things like that. We have about 5 other task forces. So that's one of the things that I actually feel is a true silver lining of the changes that have occurred, and people within the staff are really embracing these wholeheartedly, and I'm excited about that.
That's really wonderful, Kathi. And I just appreciate your perspective as a leader on the fact that, you know, retention and professional growth is so multi-layered and really needs to include all of these elements for people to feel like Rice is a place not only I work, but where I can thrive. And that sort of leads me to my next and last question, which is related to a topic you and I have talked about a few times over the years, the role of women in leadership in these large-scale fundraising institutions. So in a recent conversation, you mentioned to me the New York Times piece, which asked, are female leaders better at leading during a pandemic? And if everyone has not read it, I would urge you to look for it. So what in this article resonated with you as you thought about your own leadership style?
So going back and rereading that, because what resonated with me was one of the things is that the article noted is that just what having more diverse leadership across the board kind of says about an institution and its maturity in general and its general climate.
Mm-hmm.
And I have certainly felt that I've thrived at Rice. And so I would say that you take the positive inferences from such a statement, and I would say that that does exist at Rice. And so that's one thing. But beyond that, I think just specifically talking about the style that women leaders tend to have, it talked about their willingness to incorporate myriad perspectives before making decisions. And I certainly think that that's the case. I think it contrasted how sometimes men are perceived as having to appear sort of as generals, whereas if women, of course, appear that way, it becomes a negative towards them. And I think, which is, should not be the case. But I think in this instance where our foe is, microscopic and it didn't come here to wage war, it requires us to be leaders, to be less like generals. And for me, I think more like shepherds. I mean, I'm trying to lead this flock, forgive if that's a bad analogy, of 130 people through an uncertain time. I'm trying to incorporate myriad guidance, information that is asynchronous and changing daily. And so my charge, I'm not on the battlefield, I'm not making course corrections to take on the next foe. I'm trying to shepherd that group safely and in good health, mentally and physically, and with a focus on our mission, into the next iteration of our fundraising program and whatever that means, a new campaign or, another initiative that we're securing money for, like the COVID fund or something like that. Or we did just complete, for instance, our successful challenge day, 24-hour challenge, which we postponed twice in the same fiscal year. So I'm trying to shepherd them through that activity. I'm not waging a war per se on anybody or some other development shop. And the last thing I would say is that the article references comfort with vulnerability and open communication, and pointed specifically to someone who I'm coming to admire, the leader of New Zealand. And I think that's been, for me, the most humbling thing about all this is that, one, no one's ever faced it, and two, therefore, how could anyone know exactly what to do? And certainly no one can predict what's coming. So just being open, being transparent about what is known, what isn't known, but also being deliberate that, well, when we don't know what's going to happen, we really have to fall back to our values. And that's where I'm leading from. So those are the things that resonated with me when I reread the article, and when I thought about, how is that informed how I've led during this pandemic style. And that's certainly not to say there aren't plenty of other types of leaders. There's certainly, not wholly something that women do, but I do think it's something that maybe comes a little bit more natural in light of everything. So those are my thoughts about that question.
Well, and I can certainly attest to having gotten to witness you as a leader. I think the thoughtfulness and the openness with which you approach all of the questions that leaders need to lead their teams through has been really inspiring, and I think does allow people, to your point earlier, to represent the diversity of opinion that inevitably gets us to a better solution. So I appreciate you modeling that, and I think it's an important thing to call out as we finish this. So thank you again, Kathi, and thank you all for joining us. We hope you'll continue to participate in our webinars and check out our thought leadership on our website. We have heard from so many of you that getting to hear from leaders in our field has been both helpful and inspiring, and we really appreciate you, Kathi, being part of this program today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Suzanne. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. So if you haven't already, those of you listening, please connect with me and the firm on LinkedIn. And we wish you a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe. And again, many, many thanks to Kathi Dantley-Warren for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.